You know what sucks? Spending a fortune on a gaming PC. Just to realize you could have gotten the same performance for a fraction of the price. Most people think you need $1,000 to enjoy smooth 1080p gaming, but that's just not true. So I decided to prove it. Right here is the best $300 gaming PC I've ever built. And trust me, this little beast punches way above its price tag. It's quiet, compact, and runs nearly every modern game at high settings. Let me show you exactly how I built it, and why this might just be the ultimate budget build of 2025. Alright, let's kick things off with the heart of this build, the CPU. Right here, I've got the Ryzen 5 2600, a 6-core, 12-thread processor with a base clock of 3.4 GHz and a boost up to 3.9 GHz. You can easily find one for around $35 on eBay, which is honestly insane for the kind of performance it delivers. Yeah, it's a 7-year-old chip, but don't let that fool you. This thing still goes toe-to-toe with Intel's Core ES5 8400 and even rivals the i5 9400F in most 1080p titles. It's efficient, affordable, and still one of the best bang-for-buck CPUs you can get for a budget gaming build. Now let's see what we're pairing it with. For the motherboard, I'm using the MSI B450MA Pro Max 2, but honestly, any B450 board will do just fine here. My advice? Just go for the cheapest reliable board you can find. Right now, the B450MA sells for around $70 on eBay, but if you really want to save some cash, you can grab an A320 board for about $40. Easily the best value option for this kind of build. Installing the CPU is super simple. Just lift the retention arm, line up the golden triangle on the CPU with the socket, gently drop it in place and lock it down. Boom! CPU installed. Next up, we've got the RAM. And honestly, I was shocked at how expensive memory has gotten lately. Prices have gone through the roof, so finding a 16GB kit at 3200 MHz for just $45 used felt like an absolute steal. I'd say 16GB is the bare minimum these days for gaming, and this kit gets the job done perfectly. I've used these sticks a few times before, and they've always been rock solid, no issues whatsoever. We'll slot them right into the 2 DIMM channels on the motherboard. Though to be fair, this board is a bit limited. If I ever want to upgrade later, I'll have to replace both sticks entirely, which feels a bit wasteful. Alright, now let's move on to the CPU cooler. If you buy a brand new Ryzen CPU, it usually comes with a stock cooler. But if you go the used route like I did, you'll need to grab one separately. Since this chip only pulls around 65 watts, it's not exactly a heater, so we don't need anything fancy. I'm using a used 2 heat pipe air cooler that I picked up for about $5, and honestly, that's more than enough to keep the Ryzen 5 2600 nice and cool under load. Next up, we're installing the SSD. I've got a 256GB used drive that I pulled from an old system. Nothing fancy, but it'll get the job done. Of course, it's not as fast or as reliable as a brand new one, so if you're storing anything important, I definitely recommend investing in a new SSD instead. The good news? They're super affordable now. You can grab a decent one for around $15. Everything on the motherboard is now installed, so it's time to move on to the case. For this build, I'm using a used Sigmatech NYC case. Yep, one of those older budget cases straight from China. It cost me just $15, and honestly, for that price, you really can't complain. It doesn't come with any fans, but I'll think about adding some later. It's definitely one of the cheapest cases out there. Not the most feature-packed, but it'll do the job just fine for our setup. First, I'll snap in the I/O shield for the motherboard, then carefully lower the board into place, making sure it lines up with all the standoffs. Once everything's aligned, we can start tightening it down using the screws that came with the case. Now it's time to install the power supply. I went with the Cooler Master Elite V 3PC700, a solid budget PSU that provides plenty of power for this setup, and even leaves a little room for future upgrades. It's definitely not the highest rated unit out there, but for $30, it's one of the best deals you can get in this range. Once it's mounted in the case, we can start plugging everything in. The 8-pin CPU connector, the 24-pin motherboard cable, and the front panel plus USB headers. Now the system's fully powered and ready to go. Finally, we've reached the most exciting part of any gaming PC build, the GPU. For the GPU, I'm going with the GTX 1660 Super, easily one of the most loved graphics cards out there. You can find it for around 85 bucks on the used market, and honestly, it's probably the best card you can buy in this price range. I don't really need to hype it up too much. The 1660 Super has already proven itself over the years. Great performance, solid efficiency, and still more than capable of handling 1080p gaming in 2025. To finish off this build, I'm adding a rear exhaust fan. Nothing fancy, but it'll help improve airflow and keep the system running cooler. All we've got to do is screw it into the back panel and plug it into the system fan header on the motherboard, and just like that, we're done. Our $300 gaming PC is complete. Honestly, I'm really impressed with how this build turned out. Even though we used older parts, the performance is still rock solid, and we've left room for future upgrades. Maybe a higher-end AM4 CPU or a stronger GPU once prices drop further. Older cards like this will only get cheaper. Testing Fortnite, this setup actually performs pretty well, though there's a slight sign of CPU bottlenecking. On average, we're getting around 80 FPS, with 1% lows dropping to about 29 FPS, and peak frames hitting 150 FPS during free movement. However, in heavy firefights with lots of effects on screen, FPS dips back down to around 80, showing that the CPU occasionally struggles to keep up with the GPU, especially in crowded scenes. Still, overall performance is stable and smooth, making this setup great for casual or mid-range gamers who want to enjoy Fortnite on high settings without spending a fortune. Jumping into CS2 first, at low settings, the system holds a steady 100 plus FPS, averaging around 96 FPS overall. Gameplay feels smooth and super responsive. At this configuration, the CPU and GPU balance perfectly with no performance bottleneck, keeping things nice and stable. With FPS this high, you could easily bump the settings up for better visuals without losing that buttery smooth experience. Next, let's move over to Minecraft, a game that's not exactly known for being hardware optimized. Without shaders, FPS sits between 100 and 150, even though the CPU is working close to full load. Temperatures stay surprisingly cool, considering it's only cooled by a basic 2 heat pipe air cooler. Once I enable shaders, the GPU really kicks in. FPS hovers between 60 and 80, and even during big TNT explosions, it only drops to about 30 FPS, which is totally playable. Finally, let's try something far more demanding. Blacksmith, Wukong. At low settings, FPS ranges between 60 and 80. And what's impressive is how stable it stays, even during heavy combat scenes with NPCs. The only issue? The GPU's getting pretty toasty, hitting around 80 degrees Celsius. Yeah, I might need to clean it up and replace the thermal paste after this video. Moving on to a AAA title, we've got The Witcher 3. I'm testing it at full HD resolution. Starting on low settings, FPS stays steady around 90, super smooth and easy to play with no stutters or lag at all. Frame pacing feels solid the entire time, even while riding around on horseback. When I bump the settings up to high, FPS drops to around 50 to 60, but honestly, for a story-driven game like this, that's still perfectly fine. It looks great, plays great, nothing to complain about here. And that's pretty much everything about my $300 gaming PC build. If you've got a bit more budget to work with, you could definitely go for a higher-end CPU to squeeze out even better performance. But honestly, for me, this setup is a solid, all-around build for the price. Stable, upgradable, and fully compatible with modern games and operating systems. I'm sure there's still room for improvement, so if you've got a better idea for how to build a budget rig like this, drop your thoughts down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you'd do differently. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this build with your fellow gamers.